Hello. Thank you. We'll get Russ a mic. In the interim, my name is Artis Campbell. I am a producer with AMP Creative and AMP Studios. I've been with them for 7 years.
And I'm Russ Johnson. I'm the director of post-production at AMP. I've been there for many, many years as well. And so we're excited to talk about this topic just because it's something that's very interesting to us. It's something that we're really happy to have gotten involved with. And so we're all happy to talk with anybody about the subject. So we will go through very informally and just kind of hit a few points that might be interesting to anybody out there.
Yeah, so next slide. It might be our intros. There I am. And there's Russ.
That's my serious face. And yeah, we're just going to run through a little bit of how AMP got involved in immersive production. We will talk about a few immersive video fundamentals, on-set considerations, post-production considerations, platforms for viewing immersive content, and then we'll close it up. And if you have a question, we would be happy to field that. Anyone?
Yeah, next slide. So yeah, we'll start with our video journey and just how we sort of got into this work. And so we can do the next slide. So essentially, at the time, it was 5 or 6 years ago, and 360 was just kind of a buzzword at the time. I remember we had the Google...
like the cardboard
units.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like everything inside was simulated. It wasn't really live action.
That's right. It was on your phone, and it was either going to be a roller coaster or like a lion charging at you. One of those two things.
Yeah, and so we had that around the office. We knew 360 was up and coming, and one thing that I think both of us have always really appreciated about AMP is that the desire for innovation is there. And so, one of the co-owners, vice president at the time, said, "Well, go get a camera and try it out and see what we can do with it." So we got the Pix Pro. I don't even know if it's still on the market.
The Kodak Pix Pro. I think it's probably not still around, but we can check on Amazon.
Yeah, fair enough. And so we, I think next slide, we have a list of kind of the stuff we did. So essentially, our understanding of 360 at the time was that, its best practical application was to highlight a space, right? So, a medical lab or, any place that you wanted to see and explore, you were able to see all of it. Instead of, the sort of the 2D where the camera's facing.
Yeah, because, and at this point, it's been around long enough that I'm sure most people do, but a simple high-level, overview of what that is it's a camera or a cluster of cameras, anywhere from, 2, one on either side, to 16 to 30, shooting all around the entire environment, and then you didn't take all those individual camera feeds, stitch them together, and create, the space that you're in. So if you're viewing it in HD or you're viewing it in a headset, anywhere you look, you're seeing the environment.
Yeah, and so we started at Common Desk. It's a shared office space in downtown Dallas because it's pretty. That's why. And so we took the Pix Pro, and really it was testing for us. This wasn't for anyone but us. But where are the stitch lines? Where do we need to be? How do we light this? And it turned out pretty well. And in fact, I think we started to implement graphics in there as well.
We did.
Yeah. So it was all just kind of new and fun, and I felt really fortunate to be able to do it. And so the next thing we did, one of our coworkers, their spouse works for a high school, and they mentioned maybe needing, that technology or a video like that in their medical lab to sort of guide the students for, safety procedures, right? Here's where you do your eye washing. Here's where you shower if you're on fire.
Yeah, exactly, and that's when we really started to get a little bit more of a sense of how it could be used practically, as opposed to just highlighting a space. It's like training somebody, if you're in a unique space, what are the features that you need to know, and you have that opportunity to sort of rehearse and learn that knowledge without actually being in the space. So when you do go into the lab, before you've ever even, step foot in the place, you know where certain important features live. Or conversely, you can have things out of place and have people go through looking in the space and identify, well, that's not right, those things need to be changed. And so it became this new way of interacting or combining education and that sort of spatial awareness.
Yeah, And so it wasn't long after that we had the clients started to catch on. And so I had a client out of Houston that they wanted to do for a computer software company, they wanted to show off a lab of theirs. And so we took all of the knowledge that we had gained from, shooting at Common Desk and brought it down. And, I think it was successful. The client was happy. And we learned, more and more. Every time we did it, we learned more, to be sure.
Yeah. And
then also bringing a client on set. I'll get into that later. But there's, other considerations when you're having to show it off to people that are paying for it. So then we also had another client that came to us. So another practical application that we think VR is perfect for is empathy training. And so essentially what we call is immersive video, right? So when you put on a headset, you are in someone else's shoes. And so we worked with that client to come up with a whole project where, essentially we were combating bias in the workplace, whether it's implicit, conscious, unconscious. You were in the shoes of someone else that you wouldn't normally be, and you got to see it from their perspective. And the idea is that through that you gain empathy and everyone can start to understand each other a little bit better.
And then that evolved into the VR for Exclusion project that we did, which is actually available on the Oculus headset for women in tech. And it took that empathy idea and put you in the shoes of women working in this industry and just kind of things that they go through, and again, just an attempt to start a conversation for people who may not really realize some of the things that their female coworkers are going through in the tech space.
Yeah. So that's kind of our journey, and that's where we're living now, that sort of VR for inclusion. We work with a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion departments for enterprise companies, trying to combat bias in the workplace and get everyone to sort of understand each other's perspectives.
So next slide. So I'm just going to hit from a very, very high level some of the points that are involved in a production for immersive video. Next slide, please. Again, just kind of definitions of terms. 360 video, you're in the middle, you're looking around, all around you. If we put the camera in the middle of this space, it's like you're seeing everything, you're completely immersed in everything around you. Next slide. Then there's also 180 stereoscopic video. A little bit later, the technology evolved, and they came up with a better way of kind of getting that like 3D effect in only providing half the sphere. And a lot of times people think that that's more effective because it's not uncommon for people to get into a VR experience. They look all the way around the first time, and then the rest of the time they're just looking at this. So if you can have a higher quality version of just this, and it has a really good sense of 3D, sometimes that's more effective. Stitching, you hear, I think I've already said it once, so I said it once, I'll say it dozens of more times. It's the most difficult and sort of different part about this, the fact that you're taking multiple cameras. There has to be that point at which you stitch it all together, that you put it together. Some of the cameras these days have their own proprietary software that allow you to do that, but a lot of times you have to use other programs like Mystica to take, again, anywhere from 2 to 20 to 30 camera feeds and stitch them into that 360 world space. And it's tricky. It's something that takes a little bit of effort. And then deliverable considerations is basically just where you're going to see it. Obviously, a lot of what we do uses head-mounted displays like the Oculus or the Pico or the Vive, but we're always acutely aware of the fact that some people are just not going to be into that. Some people don't want to put that thing on their head. Some people, it makes them unwell. So we always, when going into a project like this, try to think about other ways people could consume that content, whether it's on an iPad or a computer. There are other ways to see 360 video, and we always go into it knowing that we might need to have those kind of alternatives. So next slide. So immersive video, is it right? Is it right for your project?
I mean, yeah, great question. I think a lot of people, again, they latch onto that buzzword, like 360 VR, that's what people are doing. Again, the way that we found it best utilized is if you're highlighting a space and you need to showcase, safety features or anything in a space, or again, using it as an immersive tool to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
But we pride ourselves on if somebody comes to us with a project and it's not right, like at one point somebody came and was like, we'd like you to film our CEO in 360. And we're like, great, where? I don't know, just like a boardroom. What will be around him? Nothing. This is a bad idea. You don't need to do it that way. You really want to make sure whatever you're capturing somehow will benefit from the technology.
Yeah, definitely. Next slide. Onset considerations. Okay, next slide. So as a producer, right, when you come into a space, you have a location scout, you have a location manager, and you say, this is where we're gonna set our frame, this is where the camera's gonna be, and it's gonna see, this is what our frame is gonna be, here's what's gonna be in it. Well, when you're shooting 360, obviously, you're setting a camera down in the middle of a room and it's gonna see everything. So how do you light it? Where are you physically? So, you know, most of the time, you have to be out of the room, and then, you know, the figuring out the lighting and monitoring. So I think like when we did it in Houston, we were able to monitor wirelessly.
That's right. Well, we actually did a couple of things. Now especially, the technology has advanced to the point that it's pretty easy to get some sort of wireless monitoring. You're either looking on your phone or you're looking on an iPad. You're obviously in the other room or whatever. But then we also ran a camera wire like out and created sort of a traditional video village that people were able to kind of see all the zones that were being captured flat. So you can take, I mean, the monitors can't really handle, or necessarily, if it's the wrong kind of monitor, getting the immersive part where you're kind of scrolling around and seeing everything, but it can take the image and flatten it across a traditional screen. So those are definitely considerations that you have to kind of go into any sort of immersive shoot with.
Yeah, I mean, essentially it's just a different way of looking at it. Your video village isn't gonna be behind your camera. You're gonna be in another room.
Because there is no behind the camera.
Because there is no behind the camera.
But lighting-wise, you know, again, your options basically include creatively placing light within the space so that it's just meant to be captured. Or if you're prepared to do a little bit more post work, you can shoot in halves. So for one of the projects in particular that was 360 and capturing the whole space, we would have the action primarily happening, say, on this half, 180 half, and all of the lighting equipment on the other half facing that way. And then when you have the action that you want, stop, strike all of the lights, and then basically film a patch that's blank, and then stitch that back into the final option. So you're getting your main action lit somewhat decently, but then you're just covering it up in post.
Yeah. All right, next slide.
So once again, I keep bringing up stitching because it's horrible and it's really hard and not fun. It's come a long way since when we first started. Like Pano was like the only software when we first started that did it, and it was very, very complicated. Then it evolved into cloud stitching services where you could basically take all your cameras, send it up to the cloud, they would stitch it, and you'd bring it back down. That was a little bit nicer. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of cameras have their own proprietary software that puts it together pretty nicely. But it is just something that you kind of need to make that decision on the front end. If you've got a camera that can handle it, or if you're going to have somebody log time in post to make sure that you're minimizing any of the stitch lines. And when I say stitch lines, the way the cameras, as well calibrated as they are, they still sometimes, when you're kind of switching from one camera to the other, there's a little bit of a distortion. And if somebody walks in that distortion, you can see it. There are ways to get around it, but it does require kind of additional post time. Spatial audio. That's the other consideration that becomes quite important. What's so interesting about this medium is we have filmmakers here. Obviously, we're at the Topaz Film Festival, and you know that you can use your camera framing, close-ups, music, all these different things to guide someone's attention to the film that you've created. You're making them look where you want them to look. In 360, they have the license, they have the agency to look wherever they want. So that's part of what's cool about it, but there are also techniques you can use to help get people's attention and guide them through the space. And one of them is spatial audio. You're able to use microphones that, in the same way the camera is capturing everything around you, it's capturing audio all around you. And you can create a situation where it's like you may have the main action happening here, but then you specifically engineer a sound behind them, so you make them look. It's just a new and kind of different way of going about, again, capturing people's attention and making sure they're seeing what they're supposed to be seeing. And then the export is, again, just that once everything is stitched, the audio is created in that way, getting it out in a format that aligns with how you want people to see it, whether that's a YouTube channel or a head-mounted display or anything else. You just kind of need to talk through that stuff on the front end, so when you go to the export stage, it's all been worked out. So that you can have distribution.
Yeah, next slide. So important to think, and Russ already mentioned this, but how will people be viewing this? So we understand the limitations. Not everyone can afford to have Oculus headsets for all of their, companies, or, at a film festival, if you were doing a VR film festival, that can get pricey. So, using just regular 360, YouTube now has the capability to use it. So, but really deciding that, obviously that has implications for how you're gonna shoot and what you're gonna shoot.
Yeah, next slide. So as we've discussed, head-mounted display, HMD, there are a variety of them out there now. They are dropping in price, so it's not like it's completely exclusive. But yeah, as you rightly point out, if you've created something and it's for a film festival like this, you've got to kind of come up with other ways to go about it, since not everybody's going to come up with their own headset. Next. YouTube or any other online player. There's a platform called Web VR now, which allows you to basically use kind of any browser, and it's, Android or Mac or PC agnostic, and that's kind of why that's a good platform that lets you just basically use a web interface. A custom app, at a certain point, we have found we have clients that have very proprietary information, so they don't want to host their experience on something just like a YouTube or a Vimeo. So then you're looking at actually bringing programming into the mix and creating an app that can house your immersive video. And the other thing that then that opens the door to is a level of interactivity where you might be able to create a branching scenario where somebody's in your face having a conversation and then waiting for your response, and then you can click, well, what do I say back? No, thank you. That was a horrible thing you said. You're making this a lousy day. And then you go through and experience what the consequences of that are. So you can either have little online quizzes or things to keep people engaged beyond just making it a passive experience. And then this is cool. We haven't actually done this. Maybe you guys can do this. Maybe you should encourage people to do 360 videos and have what they call these live activations or dome experiences, where there are special projection rigs that allow you to kind of step into the space and see it in person, which, again, we have not done. I've seen it. It's super cool. You guys should do that.
Yeah, closing thoughts. So, obviously this was our journey through 360, and, we were talking about, the audience here today and it being filmmakers. And so I want to mention that we do see room for narrative storytelling with 360 and virtual reality. Obviously, the way that we use it with our clients isn't always that, but I think there is a space for it, and I think that it's going to be coming up quickly.
Yeah, and there you can find instances now. There were early experiments. I believe Doug Lehman did a show called Invisible, which was a series. I think that maybe the technology was still too new for people to really even know where they could consume that. But there are documentaries. I think that actually it really lends itself to a documentary, to really, if you're doing an essay on some kind of space. But yeah, there are definitely narrative potential that is kind of untapped, and that's why I would think that maybe people here would find this interesting, because you can kind of get into a new medium while it is still sort of fresh and raw and just experiment.
Yeah.
And now, if anyone has a question, we'd be happy to field it.
I have questions about the stitching.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Get the question on the audio.
So as far as the stitching goes, as an editor, I've seen the 360 show up on Facebook. I wouldn't even know where to start. Is it something? Because I feel like I've always just kind of learned new things to keep myself going. Right, 360 has never been one of those things where I've even gotten to touch the footage. So I don't know where would I get that kind of footage.
Well, sometimes the various cameras or even stitching software will offer footage for people to practice on. But I would say if you're interested in kind of going online and learning about it, go to the YouTube channel Creator Up. There's this guy, Hugh Howell, who was a really early adopter, really smart, has shot with almost every kind of camera, 360, 180, and he tests the cameras, he tests the stitching software, he gives tutorials on how to, troubleshoot stitch lines and what have you. That's a great place to begin, and you don't have to spend a dime. Just start listening to or watching some of his YouTube channel videos.
And is this? Do you? Are you guys familiar with Ready Player One?
Oh yeah.
So is it kind of like the Oasis in a sense, or is that different?
That's a really good question, because it is different. 360 immersive video, it really has somewhat limited potential for interaction. I mean, you can go through and we just did an activation for the Plano Interurban Railway Museum. And that was something that highlighted a space. They've got an old electric rail car, and it's not ADA compliant. It's not something that people could get into. And they felt like that was an accessibility issue that they wanted to take care of. So we shot in there and captured all of the rooms of the car so somebody could put on the headset and be in it, and then added little click-on areas where people could see, oh, here's an additional fact. Oh, here's a little video about how the car worked, etc. But for something like the Oasis, something like, and I promised myself I wasn't going to say it, but here I'm going to say it, the metaverse, which everybody
that was going to be my next question.
is hearing about, is probably something that is more programmatic, that's more gamified. So you're dealing more with avatars and a fully created space that allows you to interact. So yeah, slightly different animals. Yes.
Wait, I'm coming.
Have you worked on any dance projects?
No, to be honest, that's a really good question. I would think that a 360 music video would be really interesting, and we have not personally done anything like that. But that's really using your imagination. Here's a place where somebody circling the choreography, because it's at the end of the day, right now, it's still very theatrical. I think of it like theater in the round. And in fact, we did a demo, again, one of our earlier demos was at the Circle Theater in Fort Worth, because that's a space where in 180, you can imagine, oh, that's like being able to sit right down and check out all of the proscenium. So something like that, I think, would probably be very exciting.
Okay, thank you.
And anybody, just to say, I know it's an intimate crowd here today. We get excited about this. I love it. I love different things. I love change. And again, it is one of the great things about AMP. Feel free to, drop us a line on Twitter or email us or whatever. If you have a question, you're going to get into a project and you just want to chat, we're happy to have that conversation. So, just reach out to us.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm a little bit of a gearhead, so I'm interested in production, the cameras, and the tools that you use. Could you list off some of those?
Yes, happy to do that. Well, as Artis said, we started with the Pix Pro, which was kind of a dinky little thing at the time, not that impressive. But what we next graduated to was a camera called the Jaunt, and that was, I think, 16 cameras, and it's all in a unit. There was a period in the early development of this stuff where people were kind of like 3D printing or creating their own rigs, and then individually like taking 6 GoPros and strapping them together, and that was a nightmare. I mean, that stuff, to try and stitch that, where there was like no calibration and you were really just trying to cowboy the whole thing together, it was really difficult. Now, they've got mostly these cameras where everything is in like, one unit. And the jaunt it had great quality, and that was what I was talking about before, the place where you could just take kind of like low-res versions of what you shot, and they would, send them up to the cloud, they would stitch them. You would take these low-res versions, do your post, and then when you found just the cuts that you need, you could say, okay, well now I'll pay you to give me the high-res version of the stitch, and then you do your final export. Unfortunately, Jaunt went out of business, so you can't do that anymore. But there are other cameras. I would say mostly like the Insta360 line is what we use the most. There's like the Insta360 Pro, the Pro 2, and the Titan, and they're great. And Insta has their own proprietary software, which is a little more user-friendly. I have found it to be a little more user-friendly. But a lot of people would also use a program called Mystica to get that all stitched. And then at that point, fortunately, Adobe has come a long enough way that Premiere is pretty good with all the immersive formats. So we cut almost exclusively in Premiere.
That was going to be my next question. What are you using to cut it? So great. Wait, hold on.
I'm trying to imagine it. Is it because nonlinear, is it horizontal or vertical? So like, are you going up and when the stitching, and then like how do you? Because it's not really telling a story so much since you're able to walk around. I'm confused with how the timeline looks.
It is pretty. I mean, it's actually very linear. You don't have what they refer to as 6 degrees of freedom. 6 degrees of freedom is like when you put on a headset, and that's more like the Ready Player One or the sort of like metaverse experience where you walk around and then you're walking around within that digital environment. You're pretty much going to be stationary if you're watching like an immersive video. You're in the center, the action is happening around you. I mean, maybe you specifically have a swivel chair so it's easy to look around, but if you move, the environment moves with you. It doesn't really change. Is that the question that you're?
Kind of, yeah, I think so. I guess in my mind I'm envisioning like, recently, maybe during the pandemic, there was a GoPro video that came out for a bowling alley. No, GoPro, not GoPro, it was a drone. The drone video, and they had, staged all of these things happening, and the drone went through, and how you were talking about the audio, you move along with it. The audio was happening, like I guess they stitched the audio in either post or it was happening because you could hear people talking and having conversations. So I'm just trying to figure out like how those are all stitched in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can do that. There's an app, and Facebook put it out. Obviously, they've invested a lot since they bought Oculus in trying to make this popular. I believe it's called FB Spatializer or Audio Spatializer. And it's an interface that very specifically, it's like you're doing audio, but you're doing it with like a grid of the space. So you can take like somebody's voice and put it here and then keyframe it moving so that people, if they're watching the conversation and you're looking over here, but you're hearing it over there. And so it's just this whole new arena of audio engineering. But in terms of just looking at the space when you're editing it, there's what they call the equirectangular view, which lets you take the 360 space and just flatten it out. So that's kind of how you have to do a lot of your post. But then there's a little feature where you can switch and then check and see what it's looking like in 360. If you're super fancy, you can actually even hook up your headset to Premiere, and then while you're editing, you're looking around and seeing it. That doesn't work great with all computers, but it is possible.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this. I was late, so if you said this already, just be like, show up on time next time, young lady.
No worries.
But where's the because I'm really interested in doing a film 360, but I mean honestly, I'm looking around like I'm actually gonna admit this. Like like on YouTube and stuff, I don't even like watching them. You know, like I'm lazy. I can't figure out how to move around. I'm like, this is just too much work. And so, but I am interested in doing it as a filmmaker, exploring it. So one of my questions is, I'm gonna get to the point. Where can I really learn more about it? Like, where in the trades, where are people talking about this the most, where I can learn the most and be up to date on sort of like distribution possibilities, what's happening with the market with it? So from a business standpoint, where's the best place to get information on, watching the trend of this?
Sure. Well, again, I will name check Hugh Howe and the Creator Up site on YouTube just because he just has such a deep body of work explaining, not only explaining how different cameras work, the quality of different cameras, demonstrations of how different software works, but he's also, in doing that, he's always showing lots of examples of the work that he does, because he's an immersive video professional, and he's worked for people doing advertising. He's worked for people doing things that are more like dance installations. I have also gone, most of the cameras that are kind of interesting right now, again, Insta360 being ones that we like, have Facebook groups, and anything like that, any kind of social media where people are just sort of sharing their trial and error, because a lot of it is trial and error, are great to see. You know that something is new and kind of cutting edge when it's like, whereas any other feature of filmmaking, you can go on and Google it right now, and there's a million videos on like how to use Premiere, or how to use Final Cut, or how to use a camera. You have to kind of dig to find some of this stuff, to find stuff that's good. But that's usually where we start. If we can't get the information that we need from the actual camera manufacturer, and again, a lot of times they're very good because they want to promote the technology, they want to sell you equipment, they can be very helpful. But beyond that, just going online, going to YouTube, and watching the videos that are available there. Or reaching out, like I said, to people like us, and if there's a specific situation that you're kind of trying to parse out and figure out, we're always happy to talk.
Thank you.
So do you think that production-wise, is this something that someone would want to hone in individually, or do you think that it's something that, let's say, I'm filming a regular film, and then I decide I want to hop over and do 360 and then go back and forth and that kind of thing. Like, do you think that's adequate, or do you think that if you're going to go 360, like just kind of dive all in?
Sure, yeah. So I think a little bit of both. I think that there is, and to your point as well, when you're thinking about the type of project that you want to do that's narrative, right? You still want to think about the space you're in. It still has to be an interesting space where there's a lot of movement, because that's what's going to keep people interested, and that's using that technology to its best possible application. But that being said, you can focus their attention in one spot and use that spatial audio like you talked about to guide them somewhere else. Then you can have breakout, 2D video. So say, this huge scene is happening, and there's a lot of people, and it's very Aaron Sorkin, and everyone's walking and talking, and then two people go off. You can then insert a 2D video and show that scene in 2D, right? Within a headset, yeah, or in the 360. So I think that there are going to be really interesting ways to combine the two. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. Was that the question? Was that the good answer?
Yes, yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, has the wheels turning.
It's definitely something that I wouldn't double down like everything just on 360. I think better to be well versed in other traditional techniques as well. But there are, for example, cameras like the one we use for the Plano rail thing we talked about, that allow you to, after the fact, like I've caught all this action in 360. Part of its stitching app lets you focus in on one thing and go in and just frame it and have it exported as just a traditional like 1920 by 1080 video. Or even do tracking, like you want to do a big like sweeping vista shot. Well, you've got everything. You've got the whole world. You can then go in and like say, I want to start here on the mountain, track the shot going down, down, follow it, down, down, here to the ground. And then export it that way as traditional video. So I think that just being able to operate in both worlds probably makes a lot of sense.
Okay, I have a follow-up question to that. So, if there's a 360 video idea that you have that you think, oh, this would be cool to have people watching 360, like a dance video, like she had mentioned before. But then there's an opportunity also to do a traditional. How would you sort of plan to do a traditional one, or is there like you just said there was a way to take some of it? How would you plan to kind of do both, where you would have a 360 and a traditional video? What would that look like for you as far as production planning?
I mean, what it typically looks like for us is that we book both crews. I mean, we plan to shoot our environment with our 360 crew, knowing that, again, everybody has to disappear for that, but then go in and cover individual bits with traditional cameras. I mean, you could use that technology where you use the algorithm to isolate things and use it as 2D. It's still not quite as high a quality as just a regular camera. So by and large, when we're doing it professionally, we're doing it at the same time. We get our 360 scape first, and then we go in and get coverage. Anything that we might have showing up as a video window within the 3D environment, we just shoot with our standard techniques.
Thank you.
Okay. Is it easy to get your hands on the equipment you need to rent if you're not ready to purchase a whole situation?
Yeah, actually, it is easy to rent. The higher end cameras. They're available in a lot of houses now. We don't have one of the high end cameras. We don't do it enough yet. There could come a day, but it also changes so fast. It changes so fast. You have to really, really be confident that you're going to be using that camera, that it has what it takes to last, at least a full year or two worth of value. But yeah, like the Insta 360s that I've mentioned, those are all things that we've rented, and they're not egregious. It's not that bad. Or alternately, if you're just trying to figure it out, you're just trying to see, kind of how it works. There are like little $100 things you can stick on your phone. There are cameras that are, really, really simple and scaled down. But I think that, again, just like we did, with that silly Kodak Pix Pro, it allowed us to get comfortable with how it worked. And sometimes, personally, that's what I would recommend. Get an inexpensive camera, go out, play with it, see how that works. And then when you're like, okay, I've got it, I've blocked out my idea, now I'm going to rent the high-end camera, now I'm going to execute in that way.
Okay, and then a follow-up question. So whenever you do get to the high-end part in your journey, what, studios do you rent from that you can recommend?
I have to be honest. Our equipment manager usually takes care of that, and it's just information that I don't have. Do you know? But as I said, if that's something you're truly interested in, hit one of us later, and I'm happy to get that information because, either we have a Bowie, and our Bowie takes care of all of those magical technical things.
Thank you.
Yay for Bowie. Do we have any other questions? Is there a way for us, like you said, to contact you for anyone who is maybe watching online that may have additional questions?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Russ Ray Johnson. Or just email me at russ@ampcreative.com.
Artists@ampcreative.com. Email anytime. And again, if we don't have the answer and we need a Bowie, we can put you in touch with a Bowie.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for coming out. And
Thanks for having
giving
us.
this awesome talk. Okay. Ooh, wait, I'm still here. Hello. Okay. All right. So if anyone has not grabbed a sandwich, please do so. We had originally scheduled our ice cream social, but we're going to postpone that until a little bit later, whenever whenever there's some more people here. So we'll just do some mixing and mingling. Don't forget, there's a beverage station over here. So if you're thirsty, we still have beer and wine. If it's not too early for you to partake, feel free to have some of that. Other than that, we'll just have some good old fun mingling time and hang out. And we do have our background up, so if you want to take some photos and selfies and tag us at #WIFDallas and #Topaz